The trading floor lights flickered as the crowd roared, and in the center of it all, Lila stood frozen. Her trembling hands clutched a thin folder that carried the fate of millions. No one noticed the faint scar along her jaw, a relic of a distant war. The news anchor's voice echoed through the air. The woman behind the world's fastest-growing crypto exchange is under investigation. Cameras flashed, their blinding light tearing through her composure. A banker whispered, "She shouldn't have made it this far." Lila exhaled slowly, memories of bombs and sirens cutting through her mind. She saw the dusty streets of her childhood, the cries, the chaos. Now the battlefield was made of glass and steel, the weapons, numbers and secrets. She stepped forward, the crowd's voices merging into a single deafening hum. "I built this," she whispered under her breath, her eyes locked on the panel ahead. She didn't come this far to break now. The air was thick with dust the day she was born. Her mother's cries echoed off the cracked concrete walls of a basement shelter. Outside, the war raged on, mortar shells falling like iron rain. Lila's first breath was drawn in darkness, lit only by the flicker of a single candle. Her father whispered promises of safety he knew he could not keep. A rumble shook the floor, sending tiny stones tumbling from above. Her mother clutched her tighter, as if holding her could shield her from the chaos. Somewhere far off, a siren wailed, a sound that would follow her into adulthood. The scent of damp earth and gunpowder clung to the air, searing into her earliest memory. Survival was her inheritance, resilience her first gift. She never asked to be forged in fire, but it shaped every step she would take. Lila's childhood was painted in shades of gray. She learned to count not with toys, but with the number of nights without bombing. Her friends were shadows in the dim light of underground corridors. School was a folding chair, a scavenged notebook, and a teacher who taught by whispering. She grew used to the sound of boots in the street, the sharp bark of orders, the distant hum of engines. Hope came in brief flashes, her mother's song, the rare smile from her father. Each day was a negotiation between danger and survival. Even then, she understood the fragility of stability and how quickly it could shatter. The first time she saw a computer, it was a relic, dust-covered, with missing keys. A foreign aid worker had brought it, explaining it no longer worked but could be used for practice. Lila touched the plastic casing like it was treasure. She spent hours pretending to type, imagining code flowing onto a glowing screen. Her father watched, puzzled, but her mother saw the light in her eyes. Even without power, even without a connection, the machine became her window to a different future. By the time the war began to fade, Lila had already built her resolve. She watched her city emerge from the rubble, but she carried its scars inside. The streets smelled of dust and fresh paint. Markets reopened, laughter returned in cautious bursts. Yet she walked with purpose, always scanning for opportunity. She knew her path would lead far beyond these borders. The world had once tried to bury her in darkness. Now she would rise and claim her place in the light. The city's recovery brought new opportunities, but also new gatekeepers. Lila stepped into her first interview at a prestigious finance firm. The room smelled of polished wood and expensive cologne. Behind a glossy desk, the hiring manager barely looked up from his laptop. "You don't have the background we need," he said without reading her resume. She kept her voice steady, explaining her skills, but his eyes drifted past her. The war zone she came from might as well have been a stain on her record. She left the building with her head high, but her stomach churned. That day, she learned the unspoken rule. The world wasn't designed for her to win. But she also decided she would never ask for permission again. Rejection became routine, each meeting a variation of the same polite dismissal. Some laughed at her ambitions. Others offered unpaid opportunities that reeked of exploitation. But late at night, she studied finance and technology, her only light the glow of her second-hand laptop. She learned to read market charts like maps, tracing the lines as if they could lead her out of the maze. She absorbed every scrap of knowledge, every free course she could find. While others slept, she built the foundation for something no one could take from her. The hunger that drove her was no longer just survival, it was the need to prove she could bend the world to her will. Her first attempt at a business was a disaster. She launched a small online trading service, convinced she could outsmart the market. But a sudden crash wiped out her savings. Friends called her reckless, family urged her to quit. The shame stung, but it didn't crush her. Instead, she dissected her failure like a surgeon, tracing every miscalculation. She realized that to win, she needed more than skill. She needed a network, a strategy, and the resilience to outlast storms. She closed her laptop one night, eyes burning, and whispered to herself, "Next time I'll be ready." An unexpected ally came in the form of Omar, a sharp-witted developer she met at a community tech event. He listened to her vision without smirking, without doubting. Together, they brainstormed over cheap coffee in crowded cafes, sketching ideas on napkins. Omar believed in speed and innovation, and Lila believed in the unshakable force of her will. They decided to build a platform that would cut through the red tape and serve people like her, those overlooked by the traditional system. Every day, the plan grew sharper, the ambition bigger. The first lines of code were written in the corner of a public library, their budget too thin for an office. The air smelled faintly of paper and dust. Lila typed as Omar debugged, their conversations a rapid-fire exchange of solutions. Outside, life moved on, but inside those walls, something was taking shape. The platform was raw, imperfect, but it was alive. For the first time, Lila felt the future in her hands. And this time, she wasn't just surviving. She was building something the world would have to notice. The launch day was chaos wrapped in adrenaline. Lila and Omar watched the numbers climb on the screen, users registering faster than they could track. The library corner that once housed their dreams was replaced by a rented workspace buzzing with energy. Phones rang non-stop, keyboards clicked in a frantic symphony. Omar grinned, saying, "We're not small anymore." Lila felt the rush, but also a flicker of fear. Success this fast drew eyes, some friendly, some not. She knew the higher they climbed, the sharper the knives would be waiting. Still, she leaned closer to the screen, watching the line rise. This was only the beginning. With growth came attention from investors. In a glass tower downtown, Lila pitched to a table of suited men. Her voice was steady, her slides sharp. But she caught the smirk of one executive, his eyes lingering on her appearance rather than her data. "It's ambitious," he said, "but maybe too ambitious for your experience." The insult was thinly veiled, and Omar shifted uncomfortably beside her. Lila smiled, masking her fury, and delivered her closing line with icy precision. She left that room knowing they'd find funding, but not from those who doubted her worth. They secured funding from a smaller but daring investor. With the cash came rapid expansion, new hires, upgraded servers, a growing buzz online. Lila worked 16-hour days, barely stopping to eat. The platform's name began appearing in industry blogs, hailed as the disruptor to watch. But success brought a new kind of exhaustion, the kind that eats at your focus. Omar urged her to rest, but she couldn't. "We have to move faster," she said, "before someone copies us." She knew the race was on. The first sign of betrayal came quietly. One evening, Lila noticed discrepancies in the code comments. Small changes, subtle enough to hide. When she confronted a junior developer, he avoided her gaze. Omar said it was fine, he muttered. Her pulse quickened. She trusted Omar implicitly, had since the beginning. But something about the hesitation in his voice lodged in her mind like a shard of glass. That night, she stayed in the office alone, combing through lines of code, looking for patterns. What she found made her stomach knot. Someone was building a back door. She didn't sleep. By dawn, the city was waking. But Lila was still at her desk, piecing together a trail of digital footprints. Each commit linked back to Omar. Her hands hovered over the keyboard, disbelief clashing with dread. The man who had built this dream with her was quietly laying the groundwork to take it away. Outside, sunlight crept over the skyline, indifferent to the storm now brewing inside her. She knew confrontation was inevitable. But first, she had to decide if she wanted truth or leverage. Lila didn't wait long. She called Omar to meet her at their office after hours. The city outside was dark, the streets quiet, the only light spilling from the floor-to-ceiling windows. Omar arrived smiling, but she saw the flicker in his eyes when he noticed her expression. "We need to talk," she said, voice low and steady. She slid a printout across the desk. Lines of code, timestamps, IP addresses. His smile faltered. He reached for the paper, but she kept her hand on it. "Why?" she asked. The silence between them stretched until it felt like the walls were closing in. His answer would change everything. Omar exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. "You think I'm the enemy," he said, his tone almost amused. She didn't blink. "The code speaks for itself." He shrugged, as if the betrayal were a minor misunderstanding. "We needed a safety net," he said, "in case you lost control." The words hit like a slap. Lila realized he hadn't just planned to take the company, he'd never believed she could lead it. Her fingers tightened on the desk's edge, nails pressing into the polished wood. In that moment, trust shattered into something sharp and dangerous. She left the office without another word, but her mind was a storm. The betrayal cut deep, but the lesson was clear. Power had to be protected. Back at her apartment, she spread documents, contracts, and financial ledgers across her table. She began mapping out the structure of their company, highlighting weak points Omar could exploit. Every note she made was a step toward tightening her control. This wasn't just survival now, it was war. And she had no intention of losing. Days later, Lila returned to the office with a plan. She called a full team meeting, presenting a new security protocol for the platform. Omar sat across the table, watching her closely. She outlined encrypted access keys, multi-step approvals, and a silent monitoring system. The team nodded along, unaware this was also a trap. Any attempt to bypass her new system would trigger an alert, sent directly to her. Omar's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The game had shifted, and now she was playing it on her terms. That night, she received her first alert. Someone had tried to access restricted systems. She didn't need to guess who. Sitting in the dark laptop balanced on her knees, she watched the live trace unfold. The lines of code were no longer just numbers, they were the outlines of a thief's hand. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. If Omar wanted a war for the company, he had just fired the first shot. And Lila was ready to hit back, harder than he could ever expect. The next morning, Lila arrived before anyone else. She unlocked the server room, cold air hitting her face. She pulled up system logs, confirming what she already knew. Omar's breach was deliberate. The hum of machines was deafening in the silence. Her reflection stared back from the server rack glass, eyes steady. This wasn't the time for hesitation. She prepared an emergency protocol that could lock him out completely. But it came with risk. One wrong move, and she could crash their entire platform. Her phone buzzed with a calendar alert. Board meeting in 2 hours. The showdown was coming. The boardroom was full when she walked in, sunlight glinting off the polished table. Omar sat at the far end, expression unreadable. "We need to discuss governance," he began. Lila stayed silent, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were screenshots, logs, and timestamps. Gasps broke the air. One board member looked at Omar with open disgust. "Is this true?" Silence. Omar's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. Lila's voice was calm when she said, "This company will not be stolen from the inside." Omar stood suddenly, palms flat on the table. "You think you built this alone?" he snapped. The room fell silent. Lila met his glare without flinching. "I built this while you were building an exit strategy." His face flushed, and he turned to the board, trying to spin the narrative. But her evidence was undeniable. The balance of the room shifted. eyes moving from him to her, waiting to see her next move. She didn't waste the moment. Lila pulled a signed resolution from her bag, one that gave her full operational control, backed by the majority of the board. One by one, they nodded their approval. Omar's fists clenched as he realized the trap was complete. "Security will escort you out," she said, her voice steady but cold. He didn't move at first, then slowly turned toward the door, his shadow stretching across the polished floor. The silence in the room was absolute. As the door closed behind Omar, Lila allowed herself one deep breath. She turned back to the board, outlining the next phase of expansion as if nothing had happened. The tension in the room slowly eased, replaced by focused attention. In that moment she wasn't just the founder. She was the leader no one could ignore. Outside, the city's skyline glowed under the midday sun. The war for her company had been won, but she knew new battles would come. She welcomed them. The office felt like a different world without Omar's presence. Conversations that once stopped abruptly when she entered now flowed naturally. Lila moved through the open-plan floor with quiet authority, her steps measured, her gaze scanning every corner. She paused at a designer's desk, asking about a new interface feature, leaning in to listen with genuine interest. At the development pod, she reviewed progress on a complex update, her feedback precise but encouraging. People met her eyes directly now, a small but undeniable shift. Trust, she realized, wasn't granted by a title. It was earned through consistency. She felt the hum of the place as she walked, the low murmur of collaboration, the rhythmic tapping of keyboards, the occasional laughter from a corner meeting. The company was breathing again, and she intended to keep it that way. Every conversation was an investment, every nod a silent vote of confidence in her leadership. The platform's momentum didn't just hold, it accelerated. Articles in major publications called it a rare case of post-crisis strength, noting how user trust had deepened despite the leadership shakeup. Lila sat in her corner office, glass walls framing a panoramic skyline, the horizon hazy under the late afternoon sun. She scrolled through glowing coverage on her tablet, pausing only to sip from a mug of coffee gone lukewarm. Charts on her monitor showed a steady upward curve, each spike and trough telling the story only she knew in full. Beyond the data, she could feel the competitive pressure closing in. Rivals were watching, studying, plotting. But instead of unease, she felt a familiar tightening in her chest. A readiness. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. She had seen what happened to those who mistook success for safety. The company's survival depended on her refusing that mistake. The message came late in the evening, when the office was nearly dark. A secure notification blinked on her screen. She entered her passcode and opened it, an anonymous tip about a pending buyout attempt on a major share block. The words on the screen were stark, clinical, but they carried the weight of an incoming storm. She leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing as she considered the implications. This wasn't an overt attack. It was a silent, calculated move in the upper reaches of finance. She thought about the old lessons from the war zone. Threats don't always announce themselves with noise. Sometimes, the most dangerous ones arrive quietly, wrapped in polite transaction. She archived the message, encrypted her notes, and shut down the laptop. Tomorrow, the counterstrike would begin. At dawn, the conference room buzzed with her most trusted people: finance, legal, and operations. Papers, tablets, and steaming cups of coffee covered the table. Lila stood at the head, arms crossed, listening as her team volleyed ideas: tighter shareholder agreements, rapid acquisition of strategic stock, counter-offers through friendly investors. The room's energy was sharp, each suggestion building on the last. She raised her hand, and the room fell silent. "We protect our independence at all costs," she said, her tone leaving no room for doubt. The words landed like a gavel. The conversation resumed, faster, sharper, anchored by her clarity. She didn't need to micromanage. They were already aligned. It wasn't fear that bound them now, but conviction. That evening, she stepped onto the balcony of her apartment. The city stretched below like a living circuit board, each light a fragment of another life. The air was cool, carrying the distant hum of traffic. She leaned on the railing, feeling the faint tremor of the building in the wind. Her mind wandered back to the basement shelter where she'd been born, to the cracked walls and the flicker of candlelight. That girl had only dreamed of survival. The woman here now had built an empire worth fighting for. She didn't know if the buyout attempt would escalate into open conflict, but she didn't need certainty, only readiness. Her gaze swept the horizon, the moon silver against the dark sky. She whispered to herself, almost as a vow, I'm still here. The crypto exchange now operated on a global scale, a living network of numbers and ambition. Screens in multiple languages lit up dashboards across continents, a constant pulse of transactions that never slept. Lila stood in the control center, a glass-walled room suspended above the trading floor, like a command bridge on a warship. Rows of analysts worked in silence, their eyes locked on glowing monitors, fingers dancing over keyboards with precision. The hum of servers filled the space, a steady heartbeat beneath the faint murmur of status updates. She walked the perimeter slowly, her heels clicking against the polished floor, pausing to study a massive digital map, pinned with flickering dots, each one a trade executed in real time. She could trace the flow of capital from London to Tokyo in seconds, a symphony of movement orchestrated by the platform she had willed into existence. Every line of code, every sleepless night, every confrontation had led to this vantage point. She was no longer the outsider. They were playing on her field now. And she intended to keep it that way, no matter the cost. Her passport filled with stamps in a blur. New York skyscrapers, Dubai gold-lit skyline, Singapore's neon harbor. Each city welcomed her with lavish boardrooms and carefully measured smiles. In these meetings she carried herself with quiet authority, speaking less than her counterparts, but saying more in every word. Her handshake was firm, her gaze steady, the air around her one of deliberate control. Yet the more global her reach, the more private her nights became. Luxury hotel suites felt cavernous once the doors closed behind her. The hum of distant traffic through floor-to-ceiling windows was her only company. She kept her rituals, reviewing contracts, scanning security reports, checking platform stability, before allowing herself a few hours of restless sleep. The victories were hers, etched into market share and revenue curves, but the trust she once shared with Omar had never been replaced. She had learned to build walls higher than the ones she once fought to tear down, and behind those walls, only she kept the key. One quiet afternoon, her assistant brought in an unmarked package. No sender's name, no return address. Lila's instincts sharpened immediately. Every unexpected delivery was a question. She opened it carefully, peeling back the tape to reveal an old dusty keyboard, missing several keys. She froze, the air in her office feeling suddenly heavier. It was the same model, the same wear, as the broken computer from her childhood shelter. She ran her fingertips over the plastic, feeling each dent and chip as if they were old scars. The memories came uninvited, her small hands hovering over dead keys, pretending to type code that could open a world she had never seen. She wondered who had sent it, and why now. Was it a gift? A warning? Both? She placed it on her desk, facing the skyline, not tucked away in a drawer. It was a relic, a reminder, and a silent challenge all at once. At the end of the fiscal year, the company gathered in its largest auditorium. A giant screen displayed the platform's growth figures, but Lila ignored the numbers. She stepped onto the stage beneath bright lights, her tailored suit catching subtle glints as she moved. The audience, hundreds of employees from every department, fell silent. She didn't talk about profits or market dominance. Instead, she spoke of resilience, of starting from nothing, of building in the face of doubt. "We are more than numbers on a screen," she said, her voice steady, carrying through the hall. "We are proof that no barrier is unbreakable." The words landed with weight, and the applause was immediate, swelling until it filled the room. She saw their faces, determined, inspired, and recognized the same fire that had driven her all those years ago. For the first time in months, she felt less like a fortress and more like a beacon. That night, she returned to her office long after the building had emptied. The city below was a patchwork of golden lights and shadowed streets, the moon hanging like a silver coin in the sky. She placed the old keyboard beside her and stood by the window, her reflection merging with the view. The silence was deep, but it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. She whispered the words that had carried her from a war shelter to this high-rise. I built this. Her breath fogged the glass briefly before fading. Somewhere in the maze of streets below, deals were being struck, alliances formed, betrayals seeded. She knew the battles would never end, but she no longer feared them. She was ready for whatever came, armed not just with strategy, but with the memory of every fight she had already survived. And that was why her name was spoken in boardrooms around the world, with equal parts respect and fear.